Welcome everybody to this first meeting of the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee for this triennium. My name is Grant Edge. I'm chair of the committee, and I'd like to welcome the other committee members around the table as well. I'd like to invite Councillor Karakia to give us a Mihi whakatau before we start. The Karakia will carry over from this morning.
Committee, Audit and Risk and Compliance. Nō reira, ko tēnei mihi whakatau o te hui tuatahi ko tēnei committee. Nō reira, tuatahi ka me nui ki te mihi atu ki tō tātou matanui te raki, koe te timatanga me te whakauti ko tau katoa. Nō reira, ka mihi au ki te kai humai o ka me pai katoa. Ka mamahara mātou ki a rātou kaitua ko tau wairua. Nō reira, koutou rā o ia marae, o ia iwi, o ia waka. Haere roke ki taro te whānui a tānei ko tuatarai, haere atu rā. Ka mamahara tia mō tō whānau Karakia, e oti poti, mō te kaik o tāgau, e haere atu rā o Paul Paura Karakia. Nō reira e Paura e haere atu rā ki te pātupapa wairua, tākoto. I mihi atu kia koutou o nā memo o te committee, I mihi atu mō tō independent member o te committee, e mihi atu kia koe o Graham Naylor, e mihi atu kia koe mō te Graham McGlynn. Graham tuatahi, Graham tuarua. Nō reira, no mahare mai mō te committee tuatahi ko tēnei triennium o te kauni hera taio ki Waitaha. E mihi atu kia koe o te whare tū nei, whare o Waitaha. E mihi atu o te whenua o te pātawhi tō te kohaka kaikai o waro, o maru tere, whakapakaruru au, o nai tuahuri. Nō reira, e Grant, nā mihi, kai whakahaere tuarua e John, nō reira, e te kaimahi o te kaunihera, mihi atu. Tēnā koutou, mihi atu kia koutou katoa. Kia ora. Are you, you're Graham Naylor? Yes. Kia ora, Graham. Amen. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. I've been informed that we have a quorum present today, and I'm pleased to declare the meeting open. In terms of apologies, we have an apology from our independent member, Graham McGlynn, and Councillor Robinson is also an apology for today. We have I'm not aware of any conflicts of interest, and there are no deputations or petitions today, and I'm not aware of any extraordinary or urgent business, and there are no notices of motions. We'll now move to item 7.1 and seeking confirmation of the minutes from the meeting held on the 15th of September. Are there any issues related to accuracy of the minutes? No issue? No. Yeah, so we're noting, and I'll just read the recommendation that the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee notes that confirmation minutes of the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee held on the 15th of September. Do I have a mover for that? John Sunkel, second. Councillor Southworth. All those in favour, please say aye. No? Carried. Thank you. Item 8.1 is a report on the Financing Committee resolution status, describing the current status as at the December 2022, And Giles, I was wondering if you could please speak to the report.
Oh yeah, thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, there's 4 outstanding resolutions. Actually, the first one, which relates to insurance renewals. The insurances have been renewed as indicated at the last meeting, and we will be bringing a paper currently scheduled for February, I think, to give a complete overview of our insurance arrangements, and also importantly those areas where we have historically made a decision not to take insurance for various reasons. Suggest that the second outstanding resolution around the Treasury policy review is closed, given that that will be picked up with a formal review as part of the LTP process for 24-34. Otherwise, it will stay outstanding for some time, and it will just be part of our normal course of business in preparing the LTP. And in terms of the terms of reference for this newly formed committee this triennium, again, we'll be bringing a proposed terms of reference to the February meeting, assuming the meeting dates are confirmed next week, and then take that to council for formal approval in March is the plan. The final one is just relating to the release of a public excluded item which we dealt with through our governance team in the normal course of events. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions or clarification? None. I'll put the motion. That the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee notes the status of previous resolutions provided in the Status Audit, Finance and Risk Committee Resolution Report December 2022. Do I have a mover? Councillor South. Seconder. Graham Naylor. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. We'll now move to page 20, item 8.2, which is a report about 3+9 reporting. And Brian Elliott, Chief Financial Officer, will introduce the report for us. Brian, away you go.
Obviously, it's been positioned with the monthly reporting for October. The monthly reporting is kind of a backward-looking situation against a budget we developed some time ago. It's probably of more value to talk mostly about the 3+9 forecast. It was our first forecast for the year, very much an MVP work in progress for us in terms of trying to get regular quarterly forecasting underway. The obvious question, I guess, people might ask around this is that where we in the 3+9 forecast suggested that we were heading for an overspend for the year, we are currently not showing that kind of outcome in the October year-to-date reporting. A lot of that is really about the phasing and of expenditure within the existing budgets, and at 3+9 we refined that down to a point based on what we now know is likely to happen, and we once again refine that further at the 6+6, which is about to start now. One of the things to note about it, I guess, is that even in terms of that forecast we struck at the 3+9, we're ahead of the pace at this point in actual terms. There are 2 key large items which that really is addressing. One being a large expected deficit in the consenting group by the end of the financial year. Currently, that's not showing up because we're not in a current position where we're fully staffed. So a lot of that cost and the revenue loss from addressing the backlog of work has not yet hit our books at this point. And the second one being that we had built in some operational savings into our expected budget for the year, and we're finding in the forecast that that was going to be a struggle to meet. Currently, we are very fortunate that the the digital team are underspending once again because a fairly large inability to acquire the right skilled people, and that's leaving us with an offset against those potential savings. So in some ways, we've been very lucky to date. At this point, we are expecting things to deteriorate during the second half. But at the same time, the management task in the 6+6 forecast will be to close that gap and bring us in on a balanced budget for the year. So very much a fluid living document at this point. So I guess if we just opened it for questions at that point.
Thanks. Are there any questions of clarification or anything anyone wants to raise? No, I'm just going to say that it's quite good that you're adopting this 3+9 because it's giving some forward thinking about what we can do as we go into our annual planning process and budgeting and things, thinking about that too. But obviously, like I say, it's fluid, and 6+6, we're going to have a different picture. So that's quite good. Thanks, Brian. Bob.
If I may ask Brian a question, in terms of the river rating general reserves, river rating reserves, you're saying forecasted to be a negative 220,000. So you've, and yet the state of the reserves at the moment is more than that. So that's accounting for the expenditure that you're proposing to fix up the floods we had this last winter, I assume.
Yes, that would be correct, because some of that is OPEX, some of it's CAPEX, and this is purely the OPEX element of it.
These numbers are already recognising that liability. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Brian. I'll put the motion, and then there'll be opportunity for discussion if there's any more discussion. But recommendation that the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee receives the portfolio health and financial health report for the period ending the 31st of October 2022, and we note the details of the 3+9 forecast for the year to 30th of June 2023. Any further discussion on that? No further discussion. Could I have a mover for this? Graham Naylor, thank you. Seconder, Councillor Southworth. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. We'll now move to item 8.3, portfolio performance, quarter 1, 2022-23. Invite Trudy Baker, the Principal Advisor in Portfolio Management, to come to the table. Hi, Trudy. If you could just...
Great, thank you so much. As you said, this is the first quarter portfolio performance report from the 1st of July through to the 30th of September. It's our first opportunity to report to you on our progress against the annual plan 22-23. As you would have seen in the report, we have 40 levels of service. 30 of these levels of service are on track to be achieved, and one has already been achieved. So that sets out an achievement rate of around about 78%. Of those remaining levels of service, 7 of them are at risk, and we've determined that 2 will most likely not be achieved by the end of the year. Just to elaborate that in a bit more detail, of those 40 levels of service, there is at least 1 or more measure for each level of service, and for each measure, there is at least 1 or more targets. So those targets become amplified. The 40 levels of service are reflected in the 96 specific performance targets. If one of those targets is off track, then we reflect that the entire level of service is off track. And so specifically, we have 10 targets which we believe are at risk and 2 targets which we believe will not be achieved. Appendix 1 outlines exceptions reporting for those particular targets, but I'd just like to give a little bit more of a summary around the factors that have been affecting us during quarter 1. There's been a real flavour of staff disruptions, largely driven by winter illness and by COVID-19. There's also been labour market pressures, staff turnover, which is affecting our staffing levels and our ability to deliver on some of those targets, and particularly catching up on some of the targets that we may have failed last year. That's flowing through onto the public transport driver shortages, which is affecting our ability to ensure public transport's leaving on time. So that particular target is tracking just behind plan. The consent backlog is a known issue. We're currently achieving statutory timeframe compliance of 60%. And while we've got a plan in place, it's unlikely that we will rectify that to 95% by the end of the year. So that's one of those targets that we are anticipating that we won't achieve by the end of the year. Other staff disruptions are affecting some of the compliance monitoring and incident response rates, and these are tracking just below target. So these are shown also as at risk. Work program disruptions such as flood recovery has been a priority, and so that's been taking resource away from other planned work programs such as a scheme review. So that's also shown as amber. We've noted with at least 2 targets the time required to progress enduring partnerships with mana whenua. In particular, we have a 4-year plan for the RPS, land and water and coastal plan reviews, and while we're making good progress, it is taking some time. So those targets are marked as amber. The team are preparing a revised schedule and discussions planned for early next year around how to reframe those products around the available timeframes. Other external pressures include targets that have been highlighted around the overseer review last year, which has had flow-on effects for the Farm Environment Plan audits, which are slightly behind target for this year, and also gazetting of the Canterbury Biodiversity Strategy, which is still expected to be available in December 22. The team are shadow planning for this, but they're waiting for that to be gazetted before executing those plans. Finally, there's one more target which we have noted as red, and that's level of service 38.1. It's a measure of investment made in climate change outcomes, and it was agreed that the intention of this target would be wrapped into the climate action plan. We would not progress this particular measure. That decision was made after the annual plan was adopted, and so we're still articulating that as a target in the annual plan, but our intention is not to progress with that target, rather to reflect our climate action activities as a focus and to continue delivering and developing a climate action plan in response to that. Should also be noted in that appendix, we've highlighted 6 targets which we've already achieved this year. We would expect that most of the targets would be achieved at some point throughout the year, so that's great that we've already got 6 under our belt. The final point I'd like to make is that this paper is a different format to what councillors may have received last year. Last year, you may have been familiar with the quarterly report, which was a comprehensive narrative, and we're making a deliberate shift to be able to provide more timely reporting to this committee and to be able to provide a status update as close as possible to the end of the quarter. So our intention is now to present this format as part of the regular quarterly reporting to audit finance risk, and the narrative that you may have received last year will be part of a more comprehensive web-based platform that includes updates on levels of service, key initiatives, but also news and media releases relevant to that particular program and the initiatives that are happening in that space. So that should be online from next quarter. You take questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Trudy. Are there any questions of clarification? Councillor Southwood.
I just had one around the target 26. Target, or the, what are you calling it, level of service 26. And in the text, it's mentioned that there's technical investigations continuing to progress a number of scheme reviews, and then a review of the Selwyn River scheme. I'm just wondering, is the Selwyn River scheme, is that a new scheme that's being looked at, that's new as a result of there having been a lot of problems in a part that didn't have a catchment, a rating catchment area already? Is that what that's referring to? Or
on behalf of Catherine Harborough, but I do happen to know the answer. It's an investigation as to whether the scheme should be extended. So there is a scheme on the Selwyn, but it's in the lower Selwyn, and there's so the investigation is as to whether it extends further up across the plains. So that's what the review's looking at.
Does that mean it's an addition, it's an extra that wasn't actually in the pre-planned? It's something that's been in response to the concerns in that part of the community, which is a good thing. But
Yes, it is. It's very much in response to the community, and just particularly discussions with Mayor Sam Broughton and Selwyn District Council, Councillor Mackenzie.
I think the interesting thing is, I think the level of service is actually just a review of the existing scheme, but we're trying to expand the mandate of the review.
precisely, so the amber is actually really, that's very valid amber. So I'm really trying to get to. That's great. Thank you.
If there are no further questions, I just a comment for me really. I mean, it is early days. We've got a bit of time to see those ones marked in amber delivered on, and some of the issues are now resolved or in the process of being resolved. So that sounds good. And I think it's really exciting that we can have some web-based transparency, if you like, about how these are performing to give the public a wee bit more information. So that's really good going forward.
Good. Nakui. Number, sorry. It was actually to do with 22, partner with Ngaitohu City and District Councils. What do you mean by Ngaitohu? Is that Ngaitohu Runanga? Is that Te Runanga o Ngaitohu? For a start?
It's named as Ngaitohu, but it is the partnership program that we've been progressing with Runanga. So yes. Yeah.
On checking, because as you know, there's so many
Different bases. Yeah. Thank you.
And so see that actually under Everest.
Yeah. Did you want an explanation of the nature of that at risk? Yeah, that was, this is relating to the broader piece of work that we're doing with the integrated planning framework. And so while we are, I think some of the wording there relates to the time required to create an enduring partnership with Mana Whenua. We have a 4-year plan, and we've been working on this for 2 years, and it's growing and developing. But unfortunately, the nature of this is that we've had to create a timeline within 4 years. And so the team, I think, following the update last week at Te Ropatuia, now have a plan to prepare a revised schedule around the progress of where we're at and what we will be able to provide by 2024. So this particular target, and there is another one, 34, both relate to the same time required to create that partnership and that collective understanding around what are we trying to co-design together.
So the situation with however the delay in agreeing the governance arrangements means the target is at risk. So that's the whole essence of this thing, is it? Trying to get to a place where you're agreeing on the whole governance model.
That's correct. That's my understanding. That's correct. Yeah, and essentially that we had planned to have, in a project plan, we'd planned to have that in place a year ago, and we've recognised that this is ongoing and it takes investment. But the nature of developing the long-term plan is that we've had to forecast targets of where we thought we would be, and while we're really comfortable with our progress now, we are behind where we thought we would be.
Okay, I take your point. Then you're really comfortable at the moment with that progress, so I'll leave it at that. But it's something to watch actually, because these things invariably just keep going, rolling on, and to the detriment of what you're trying to do in the end. Kia ora, thank you.
Thanks, Trudy. That's very good. You can leave the table if you like. Thank you. I'll put the motion and then there'll be opportunity for any further discussion. So the recommendation, page 37, that the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee notes the status of the levels of service for Q1 2022-23. Is there any further discussion? No further discussion. I have a mover, please. Look. John, second. All those in favour, please say aye. No. Carried. Thank you. Okay, we'll now move to page 45, item 8.4, key projects reporting, and invite Giles to please report on that.
Thank you, Chair. This is the first of what will be a standing item at this committee on the appropriate dates. Recognising that conversations with the previous council's AFRC was that it would be helpful to provide an overview of key or critical projects that are taking place across the organisation to allow this committee to get some assurance that those critical projects are progressing or corrective action is being identified and taken. It was agreed with that committee that we would, rather than trying to get a perfect report or perfect information, we would start the reporting. So this must, should be taken as work in progress. It is a list of projects that were identified by ELT and the previous council. We know that the list may change and that this committee or the council itself may wish to include other projects, and obviously as new projects come on stream we will include them. It tries to provide key information and shows a direction of travel on a number of key attributes related to the project across a range of the portfolios and committee structure of the council. Clearly, more detailed information may or may not be presented to the individual committees so that there is a more in-depth understanding of a particular project more relevant to the considerations of that committee. I'm happy to take any questions, comments or feedback so that we can continue to improve them.
Just a question from me, Giles, really related to the little diagrams on the right hand side. The presentation is really good for a startup. It's excellent. We've obviously got some budget projections, and then we have some actual projections and funding received or anticipated to be received from MB. I was just wondering if you could explain maybe the situation with the Ashley Rakahuri, where it looks like we're pretty much on track for that. It's on page 48. Just
so this is the latest information that will have come through from the project manager and via the relevant directors group to indicate we know that the work on financials needs to be extended and improved, and in particular one of the things that we're very keen to do is to ensure that we provide whole life forecasts. I know that this committee has asked about that on a number of occasions. We historically have tended to focus on the financial year in question. Clearly, projects and programs run for multiple years, and it's important that we give that view looking out in terms of where those projects are or are not in the context. As an individual director, this particular project does not sit within my remit. I'm not sure if any of my colleagues can provide any update. I think we'd need Catherine Harbrough, who unfortunately is not in attendance, but if there is a desire for more information, we can certainly provide it.
No, not from me. I think it's a good explanation, and it's good to see that those forward projections where we are now, and gives people a bit of transparency about where things are going. Okay, are there any other questions? Councillor Southwood.
Just with respect to the climate resilience flood protection programme, there's a mention that there's delays in the decision making at Rangitata Revival Programme, and that's to do with governance. There's a governance impact there, and just wondering if we're like, what's our role in that? And is there something happening to to either hit that deadline to get the MB funding, or is there a different plan?
I can confirm, having spoken to Catherine Harborough, that the governance meeting has occurred and that the working group now has clear direction in terms of where to go. Obviously, the information that we present here is a month out of date, but quite often just given the timing of things. And if there are updates, we can provide them verbally. You don't have anything to add to that, Tim? Was that?
Okay, I'll put the motion that the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee receives the key projects report for the period ending 31st of October 2022. Any further discussion? Councillor Sunkel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I just congratulate and thank staff for the working up of this paper and its continued work. Is something that Councillor Mackenzie and I were looking for, and our independent members are just giving us a snapshot of where these projects are. So really appreciate just the succinct information, simple finance, a little iteration of the process and where it sits. So I think really going to be helpful for this council going forward. So thank you.
Thanks, John. Do I have a mover for the motion? Councillor Southworth, seconder. Graham Naylor, thank you very much. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? No, carried. Thank you. Now move to item 8.5. The Bancorp Treasury report to the 30th of September 2022. And I'd again like to invite Brian Elliott to the table and Miles O'Connor from Bancorp. Is he online? Oh, Miles. Thank you. Welcome.
So, look, thank you for Mr. Chair for having me here, just to present, well, there is the quarterly report, but I haven't prepared a presentation. So, would you like, have you got any questions you'd like to ask me about the report, or would you like me to go to the presentation? The presentation is an update on, you know, what's happening, given there is quite a bit happening in the financial markets at the moment.
Perhaps, Miles, if you go through the presentation and then we can ask questions after. Thank you.
Just I probably could spend the rest of the afternoon speaking about what's been happening in financial markets at the moment, but look, I'll see if I can keep it to about 15 minutes. There's quite a bit to go through, but I'll just see if I can summarise it. What's been happening lately? Well, the financial markets call it the shock and awe. That's the catchphrase that they've adopted with regard to, you know, a play on the Reserve Bank governor's name. And he certainly isn't disappointing at the moment. And it was, you know, was not last week, the week before, you know, when we had the monetary policy statement, he increased the official cash rate by 70.75% up to 4.25%. Biggest ever increase we've had in the OCR since it came in 1999, since it was introduced. It was a little bit, I think some of the press reporting was a wee bit off the mark. I mean, it was saying, you know, shock, 75-point rise, Reserve Bank governor panicking. The 75%, the 75 basis point rise was actually anticipated. The markets were fully factoring in a 50% rise and were assigning about a 68% probability that it would be 75. That wasn't the surprise. What was the surprise was that he encrypt, because every 3 months they have a projected track for the official cash rate. Back in August, he projected it to peak at 4.1% next year. And this one, he raised that peak to 5.5%. That, you know, that is a big revision in 3 months, and that was a surprise. What also was surprising was that the financial markets were, you know, they were debating a bit, will it be 50 or would it be 75 points? They said, well, actually, the debate was between would it be 75 or 100 points. That took the markets a bit by surprise. And then the other one was obviously that his cure for, you know, the current problems with, because the big problem obviously everyone knows is inflation at the moment, was that you send the country into recession. So stop spending. I think, what did he say? Cool the jets, I think was his, the phrase that he used. Stop spending and start saving and slow the economy down, because we need to get rid of this inflation problem. Now, I'll speak more on this first slide, and the second ones I can go through the rest of them quite quickly. But I don't, he has come in for quite a bit of criticism recently, and some of it is justified, some perhaps not so much. I mean, he did drop the cash rate to 0.25% at the height of COVID, but so did every other central bank. And the unintended or the unknown consequence of all that quantitative easing, which was the pumping of money into the system, was inflation. I mean, it wasn't foreseen. We haven't had COVID before, so the markets and central banks didn't know how to cope with it, so they just threw money at the problem. Well, they thought that would end the problem, but what they didn't foresee was that it would cause huge inflation, the inflation that we haven't seen for 30 or 40 years. The difference, I think, now, though, is that between our Reserve Bank and the rest, and some of the others, I mean, and that includes the US Federal Reserve, the Australian Reserve Bank, the Bank of Canada, the European Central Bank, they have all come out in the last month or so and said, we are going to slow the pace of the increases in the interest, in the official interest rate. So we're going to stop. We're going to continue increasing it, but the pace of the increases is going to moderate, because we want to see the effects of the tightenings, because we've gone from 0.25 to 4.25. We want to see the effects of them before we keep going. Keep going to the extent that we previously had indicated. Whereas in the monetary policy statement last week, 2 weeks ago, he didn't give any indication of that. He said, we're going to 5.5%, and we're not going to slow down. And as say, stop spending and let's have a recession, because that's going to sort it out. So that's where I think he is differing from the rest of the market or the other central banks.
A quick question about that. Is the difference between those other international jurisdictions that their governments are being more responsible in the way they're spending money compared to the New Zealand government? So is Adrian Orr having to fight his own government as well as inflation?
Yes, I mean there is there was a feeling that the Reserve Bank, the New Zealand government did throw too much money at it, yes, and they increased it as well. They have increased the problem. And one other thing that actually I should have mentioned was that what exacerbated the problem was the invasion of Ukraine. So that just increased the inflation pressures. That wasn't foreseen. So I mean, I don't think you can blame him entirely for the increase in inflation. But I just think it's some of the responses that he's had recently. I mean, one bit that really annoyed me was that he said in September, when the cash rate was at 3%, he said that the hiking cycle, the increase in the interest rates, this hiking cycle is mature. In other words, we're a long way through it. That was when it was at 3%. Now, 2 months later, and it had gone from 0.25 to 3 in September. Now he's saying it's 2 months later. He said 2 months later, that because it was in November, the monetary policy statement, that we're going to 5.5%. So he totally changed in about 2 months. And that is sort of knee-jerk reaction stuff, I think. Now we do say, the Reserve Bank, they have little control of longer rates, and I'll show a slide later on, which is probably not that well known about what actually has happened to interest rates recently. But the big thing is that the yield curve is now inverted, and that will be evident from a slide later on. In other words, normally shorter term rates, 90 days, 1 year, 2 years, are lower than the longer term rates, the 5, 7, 10-year rates. We're actually the other way around now, and from 2 years onwards, the 2-year rate's the highest rate there is, I think, and then the 10-year rate, it just goes progressively down to 10 years. That's called an inverted yield curve. Now, an inverted yield curve, unfortunately, is normally a precursor to a recession. And so we had an inverted yield curve in 2008, and subsequently we did go into recession, as you know, with the global financial crisis. And with the Reserve Bank governor saying we're having one, with the yield curve saying that we're having one, then I think it's pretty certain that we will have one. We will have a recession next year. This is, I haven't got a laser pointer, have I? No, look, I'll just try and summarise it without a laser pointer. Got the US 10-year government bond rate and or the Treasury bond in red, and the New Zealand 10-year bond rate in black. Where we did start diverging in 2021 was because our Reserve Bank was one of the first to come out and say that interest rates would need to increase, and then subsequently we were the second central bank in the world to start increasing interest rates behind the Bank of Korea. Then the markets were pushing up both jurisdictions' rates in the expectation that inflation would increase. And what we've seen recently, we have seen that gap between New Zealand and the US narrow now, probably because the US, has been catching up a little bit. But what we're seeing in volatility in financial markets or in the interest rate markets hasn't been seen. That's the daily, the weekly, the monthly movements that we're seeing we haven't seen them since probably the late 80s. Now this next slide, that does show the change. So this is the yield curve. So if you're not familiar with the yield curve, it's a set of rates on a particular day. So anything from the rates from 3 months out to 10 years. So each line represents where all those rates were on these different dates: the 30th of September, the 24th of October, the 1st of November, and the 24th of November. Now, the reason I've chosen those dates was the 1st of November is the dotted grey line, and then the solid blue line, which is what was on the 24th of November. The 24th of November was the day after the monetary policy statement. So you can see that interest rates are actually lower. 3.5 weeks. They were lower than they were 3.5 weeks earlier, and that was after the monetary policy statement, which had actually, increased the official cash rate by the most it ever has been increased. So that's, again, the longer term rates actually coming down. So when people ask us what's happening with interest rates, well, sometimes there's a question within a question, and that's, are you talking about short term rates or are you talking about medium and long term rates? So as I say, we've got this unusual phenomenon where over the last few weeks we've had short term rates going up sharply, but we've had longer term rates fall. And it does provide opportunities for borrowers. These are the revisions to the official cash rate, just showing where ANZ are now projecting it to go to 5.5%, and then the light blue line is where the Reserve Bank projected it to be in August, and then now where they projected it to be in the November monetary policy statement. So you can see the extent of the upward revision to the projected track of the rate. And this next one, well, that's the yield curve over the last year. I'll just skip through that just for the benefit of time. I included this one. Look, to be quite honest, we didn't pick this increase in interest rates, but I don't think we were alone there. I don't think anyone did. I mean, our Reserve Bank 2 years ago said that the cash rate was going to go negative. You had the US Federal Reserve with its 800 PhD trained economists. They didn't see it. No one really did. Because, as I said, this inflation was the unknown or the unintended consequence of COVID. This just shows, how even the biggest bank in New Zealand, this sort of came at them out of the blue. You can see that back in February 21, they were projecting the cash rate to stay at 0.25, and they've been progressively over the last year and 3 quarters now, increasing their projection for the 90-day rate. So, certainly, a year and a half ago, they thought it'd be 0.25, and now we're at 4.25. So this has been, it's been a big surprise for the central banks, well, for the world in general. But as I say, we haven't had COVID before, and then it has been exacerbated by inflation, and that inflation wasn't helped with the invasion of Ukraine. Now, I put this one in because it just shows. I'll just spend a minute explaining this and how it's relevant. Is that it shows when home mortgage rates are going to be repriced, because this has quite a big effect on the economy and also on people's spending power. So you can see that they're about, I think it's about 90% of mortgages, about 80% of mortgages have terms to the next rate set of more than 3 months. So only about 20% are less than 3 months. 11% of those are at floating. Then 10% are going 10.8% are going to reprice between 3 and 6 months, but the big one is between 6 and 12 and 1 and 2 years. Now, I think there's been quite a bit of publicity about that recently, because that is when, you know, some of these cash rate increases will really bite, because at the moment there are 340 billion of residential first mortgages in New Zealand, and ANZ and Kiwibank have both come out recently and said that 50% of their mortgages still have either a 2 or a 3 in front of them, 2% or 3%. Now, those ones would have been written about 2 years ago, so they're starting to mature from now, and as you can see, it's going to go on for the next 2 years. Those rates are going to go up to between 6 and 8%. Well, at the moment, it's between 6 and 7%. There's a huge amount of spending that's going to be taken out of the system. And at the moment, I mean, the economy, and this is one thing Audit says, that you've got to stop spending. Well, a lot of people haven't felt the pain of it yet, but that pain is going to be felt next year, I think. And this just shows that when these mortgages are repriced, I think I read the other day that an $800,000 mortgage, if it goes up to from between about 2.5% to 7%, is going to cost about an extra $50,000 a year after tax. Which, you know, and you know, when you aggregate that over the 340 billion of residential mortgages, it's going to be quite a bit. Yeah, do you want me?
Keep talking.
I'll need the next slide. While that's going on, are there any questions?
There we go.
I know. No, that's not me.
With all of our, with all the planning, all the expenditure, through programs and all of that. So, yeah.
It's full. We couldn't get a restaurant. They were all full. So, they talk about the tough times we've got at the moment. Well, it's nothing compared to what we're going to have going forward.
Yeah, and they're certainly not listening to the Reserve Bank governor, are they? Yeah. It's probably full. It's probably full by bankers and this sort of people. Sorry. Anyway, I did enjoy your overview, even though it was we're going to be interesting to see what sort of medicine we're going to need.
They're seeing an increasing number of families now where they actually have a roster for who doesn't eat dinner tonight. So if someone doesn't have dinner, that's the extent of it. This is the so what the slide is. It's the official cash rate, which is in red, the 90-day rate that's in black, and the 7-year swap rate, or think of it as the 7-year wholesale rate or the 7-year bond rate in blue. Now, the interesting thing here is that it doesn't really show it that well because it's come down so sharply, but the 7-year rate has actually come down about 0.75%, while the cash rate is going up. So the cash rate and the 90-day rate are going up, but again, that's that phenomenon that I spoke about earlier, is longer term rates coming down, and this is this inversion of the yield curve. So I'll tentatively say that we've actually seen the peak in longer term rates, and that's from sort of about, when I say longer term rates, medium longer term rates, from 5 to 7 years onwards. So the cash rate will continue to go up, and so will the 90-day rate. But those longer term rates, I think we've seen the peak of them, and that was what we saw back at the beginning of October, I think it was. So there has been a big fall in those longer term rates, and that's shown by that lighter blue line.
I just clarify, you're not an economist, are you? So you're in the trading business. So I can take your knowledge with a little bit of confidence.
Well, what is it? Why did God invent economists? To make weather forecasters look good. this is the, I'll just summarise this in about 1 minute. This is just showing the bottom quadrant. This is the pricing for the official cash rate, 15th of June, where it was, and then where it is now, the dates of the RBNZ cash rate review dates. What this is showing in the bottom quadrant in May 23, a peak in the OCR of 534. So the Reserve Bank have got it at 550, the markets have got it at 5.34%, and then for it to start declining in later 23. So it's a wee bit unusual that we're in the middle of the biggest tightening cycle that we've ever had, and the market's already factoring in an easing. So that's showing that they really think that the economy will hit the wall next week. That is predicated on the fact that inflation will be controlled. Yeah, and it's actually not normally that close. Normally there's quite a big discrepancy between the two. Shall I go on to this one? Briefly, no, I'll skip that. If anyone has any questions about that, give me a ring. It takes a while to explain it. It's what's happening with mathematics, but what it does really is show that longer term, well, actually, you can see up the top there in the grey, the 5-year rate is at, what's that, 439, yet the 10-year rate is at 423, or the 2-year rate is at 4.99 and the 10-year rate is at 423. So that's this unusual phenomenon. And then the circled bit is if you need to do, you can actually hedge rates in the future. And it's because of the inverted yield curve, we have the sweet spot, which is the circled bit. But I think if I went into that, it's because of mathematics. LGFA pricing, I'll skip through that, and then that's Environment Canterbury's debt and cover profile. So your current debt, what was it, 76 million. That's in the grey, and then the green is is the interest rate swap that we took out to hedge some of the debt, so convert floating rate to fixed rate, and the rest of it is the blue is fixed rate bonds. So we have to, Environment Canterbury has to adhere to a minimum and maximum levels of fixed rate debt. So the amount of fixed rate debt that you've got is the top of that shaded blue area, which shows that you are actually policy compliant at the moment. It's the end of the presentation. Now, the one thing I will say is, and it's in the report, I mean, your cost of funds has gone up, but so has everybody's. As I said, we didn't predict it. No one did predict it, but because of the position that you're in prior to that, you actually enjoyed one of the lowest cost of funds, and because we didn't have a lot of fixed rate debt prior to it, yours went down below 2%, and so you were. It's sort of, how would I characterise it? It was the gain then and the pain now. It is costing you more, but I mean, you had significant surpluses when you compared your actual interest costs to what they were budgeted as. Yeah. So, yeah.
Councillor Scott.
You might not be able to answer this, but then again, you may have that in very big detail. I'm not sure, so I'm going to ask you anyway. So, under the Three Waters regime, with the asset being moved from local government books to an entity, and then the seeking of debt outside of that, and then if you're looking at the TAs with their debt ceilings that they have, is that going to affect the cost of local government funds? Your button, sorry.
No, I mean, if you want me to start on Three Waters, I would be here till 5 o'clock, but I think the bill's just been passed today. I mean, my personal view on it is that it won't go ahead in its current form, and probably not on 1 July 24. I think if National Act get in, which they're looking more and more likely, they have said that they will repeal parts of it, not all of it. I mean, it was a national government initiative to start with, and the reform, but I don't believe they'll just be limited to 4 entities. I think there'll be more regional entities, and also the co-governance will be scaled. Well, I won't say watered down. I'll say scaled back. We don't even know what the funding model is going to be going forward, and that's it's a little bit surprising. This is probably one of the biggest initiatives in local government in a long, long time. No, they haven't come out at all with what the new funding model will be, Because at the moment, all of your debt and most local government debt, with the exception of some, with Auckland and some of Christchurch, is funded by the local government funding agency. Now they've raised about 17 billion and lent about 15.5 billion. They have 1.5 billion of liquidity. They estimate that about 7 or 8 billion of that is water-related debt. And the basis of, this gets a wee bit sort of legal jargon, but the basis of the LGFA, the Local Government Funding Agency, is one of the most successful examples of a special purpose vehicle to fund local government in the world. In fact, I've been looking at, New Zealand has been looked at by Australia and the UK. Mark Butcher, who runs it, has been over there talking to them about it. It's held up as one of the best examples that there is. The basis of it is that they have a council has a statutory ability to charge rates, and that provides a security. That's why it has a AAA credit rating, the same as the New Zealand government, and that's why it can fund so cheaply. Now, we don't know, and I speak to Mark Butcher about it most weeks. They haven't even been told how the new entity is going to be funded, what the structure is going to be. But if they are to be involved, he did tell me they have to have, as a minimum, some sort of, well, not some sort of, a specific charge over water, over water revenue. If they don't get that, then I don't know what the new entity how it will fund itself. It hasn't even been stated yet whether it will have a specific, an explicit government guarantee or an implicit government guarantee. To get a rating and to satisfy and to maintain funding rates that you can currently get, it would have to have an explicit government guarantee.
I thought that's what happened.
Well, but it hasn't. Oh, yeah.
Councillors, press their buttons when they're talking. Thank you.
So is the risk around that the ability not to reach back to the ratepayer for the money if it's a separate entity?
Well, they have
this charge over rates. They have to have this. They have to have a charge over water somehow, a water rate, but it doesn't have quite the same legal standing as the statutory ability to charge rates. The LGFA said to me, look, it achieves if they did have what they hope to get, it would achieve 95% of it from a security perspective. So, I mean, I wish I could be more specific about it, but I don't think it will happen, as I said, in its current form, and I don't think it'll happen on 1 July 24, because if it is repealed, then or if they change it, then they won't meet the 1 July 24 deadline. The DIA, they've just taken a lease on a building in Auckland, 250 or 350 staff in Freeman's Bay, and it costs $2.2 million a year in rent. And a lot of what they're doing at the moment could be unwound by the new government.
Thanks, Miles. I'll just end that part of the conversation. So are there any further questions of clarification on the report? None. I'll put the motion that the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee receives the report from the Bancorp Treasurer Services to the 30th of September. And now, is there any further matters of discussion before I make the recommendation?
Chair, excuse me, I think we should note explicitly that the ECan is policy compliant.
Thanks, Graham. We'll note that in the minutes. Thank you. Okay, actually, we might add it to the resolution just so that it's captured. So there's no further discussion. So we'll just put up the resolutions.
We're just going to add this one.
Okay.
So we have a
Okay, so we've just added item 2 there, notes that Environment Canterbury is policy compliant. I have a mover and a seconder for that. Seconded by Graham Naylor. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. then what I'll do then is this will become the substantive. This is the substantive recommendation, and I'll just put that that the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee receives the report from Bancorp Treasury Services. Is it Treasury Services? Treasury Services. We'll just thank you. Treasury Services to September the 30th, 2022, and 2 notes that Environment Canterbury is policy compliant. A seconder, a mover and a seconder for that. Councillor Suncorp. Seconder. Councillor Southworth. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Thanks, Miles, for that presentation. It's sobering. We know that we're all in a bit of a predicament, and it's good to have this report and the understanding from you as we head into thoughts about our annual plan process and long-term plan process as well. So thank you very much.
One thing on that, I mean, councils are asking me, I mean, I have about 35 councils, and they are asking, what is the economy going to look like next year, and will it have implications for our ability to generate revenue through rates? And will the rates instalments, will the failure rates, will the non-payment rates increase? So I think, it is a real question that councils need to consider.
Thanks very much. We'll now just head into item 8.6, the external audit update, and again invite Brian and Yvonne to the table. Yvonne is the associate auditor director at Audit New Zealand.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks everyone for having me here. For anyone hasn't met me yet, I'm Yvonne Yang from Audit New Zealand, and I'm the appointed auditor on behalf of Office of the Auditor General for Environment Canterbury. I also have my audit manager, Debbie Bradfield, online. So I will take my report as read. As promised in my report, I will give the committee a verbal update for our ongoing audit. So overall, we are still on track for the council to adopt its annual report and summary annual report on 19th December. The audit work in relation to revaluation of the flood protection infrastructure is now completed. We are satisfied that the carrying amount is fairly presented in the council's annual report based on our asset intensive and materiality. For the other key audit risk areas such as variation of forest assets and intangible assets are all under internal review. The audit work in relation to management override such as journal testing and material service performance measures are still underway. We will communicate any issues to the management as soon as it arises. At this stage, we do not have any unresolved significant issues pending with the management that I feel like there's a need I need to report to the committee. We are pushing really hard to make the deadline happen, which is the 19th of December. We really appreciate the ongoing engagement and assistance from the finance team. However, just give committee a heads up, our staff start to pick up sickness again this week. So if any unforeseeable reason arises that we would not be able to sign the audit report before Christmas, I will communicate to Giles as soon as it comes. The other thing I want to mention is that I really appreciate the understanding from the council and the committee and the management for the delay of the audit timeline again this year. I know it is very disappointing, but hopefully we will still on track to adopt the annual report before Christmas. Just the normal statutory deadline of 31st October will apply for the financial year 2023. So we expect to be able to meet that deadline at this stage. I'm happy to take any questions or any feedback from the committee.
John?
Thank you, Yvonne. So you still have confidence you can meet the December 19th date. If you cannot meet that date, are there any implications for this organisation, or is fault lies somewhere? Are there challenges?
At this stage, we're still on track. At this stage, we're still on track. But if any unforeseeable reasons that from our side, so you will be breach of the Local Government Act statute deadline, but in our audit report, there will be a reason documented that would impact by Audit New Zealand's staff shortage or other reasons that our technical team will advise us to adding to the audit report. And you will have an additional paragraph in the annual report to explain the delay of the completion of audit. A lot of other Canterbury Council would be in that bracket.
Thank you, Nook.
Kia ora, thank you for your report. So this first one, is there anything also to do with internal auditing? That's separate.
No, that's separate.
Okay. So we'll leave that question for there. But all of this auditing is actually around numbers.
That's partially correct. We also audit the service performance information. So we're responsible for the whole set of annual report and the summary annual report.
Okay, so maybe I'll put this question to you. We have in this council, we actually have a very prominent cultural operation, and I'm talking more about treaty partnerships and all that. I'm just wondering around a cultural audit actually being installed into this. That probably could be the internal audit.
I would say that we're probably falling into the internal audit regime rather than our audit scope, because that's probably not part of the service performance information that you would report on to the committee. But maybe Brian can help me if you have anything on the internal audit planner.
I think some more John can comment on internal audit.
Thank you, through the chair. As we'll see a bit later on, just within the very next item, there's an internal audit charter. And that charter makes it clear that our efforts as internal audit will be risk-based. Given one of the strategic risks is around that, we'll probably look at that in the new year, but we look at a combined assurance model that we are developing across all our risk areas, and we'll bring that to this forum for approval. So February, March, we'll bring our rolling internal audit plan for input from councillors and ELT. So, but it will be risk-based. All our work is risk-based.
Okay, so I think you said that you are looking at this. All right.
It might be included. We're still in the process of doing the risk assessments and working through it. And yep.
I'm just wondering, I'll just get Giles to make a comment.
I was just going to
add, I think that in undertaking such work, it's really important that the staff that undertake the work have the right cultural competency to be able to undertake that work. And that might be an area where, in talking with John, we probably are recognised that we may not have the right people to be able to undertake the work to provide that assurance. But I think it's something we need to actively consider, is how can we undertake work that provides some assurance that we are heading in the right direction, but also recognising that in order to do that, you need a particular skill set and a particular set of experiences to allow you to provide that assurance. And actually those two things we need to consider really carefully before we provide a piece of work that actually doesn't provide you with the assurance that you'd be looking for.
Thanks, Giles. Yvonne, I mean, it raises an interesting question about the Auditor General's office and perhaps something that they might think about in the future of accommodating a cultural assessment as part of the annual plan process. Is that something that?
Yeah, I can feed that back to the sector manager in the office or the general office that's responsible for the Canterbury councils, and see this is something on their pipeline, and then or give them recommendations, something they can think about in the next year round.
So committee members may be aware that I believe the sector manager for Environment Canterbury has recently changed, and that one of the things that is on our radar is to invite, I can't remember the person's name, sorry.
Stephanie. Yeah.
Person or virtually a future meeting of this committee, or even the broader council, to provide an update on their work, introduce themselves, and also that will provide an opportunity for this council to talk about some of the excellent work it's doing in that space of partnership and working more closely with Ngāi Tahu, and potentially providing a bit of a seed to the Auditor General about how might they support that work through their future work programmes.
So just back through the chair, and I've just taken note of what chair's comment and what you've said. I actually think that this council actually is a leader right across Aotearoa in actually having that tuia unit, and so I think it just is another step, is that we actually are auditing ourselves as well, and actually around the quality assurance stuff and all of that has been actually set, because this is going to be more important as we move forward, particularly because of the intersection of the treaty and a lot of provisioning of a lot of legislation, statutory, even local governments. Okay, thank you. I'll leave it there. Kia ora, thank you.
Thanks, look, and I think we'll look forward to having some conversations to see how we could take that further. So look, I'm just wondering, are there any further questions of clarification? None. Oh, John.
Just reminding me that the valuation of forestry assets and ETS and the like, where do we sit with that in the conversation?
The revaluation of forest assets, I think the work has been completed, and then just within our internal review process, I think we are having some queries with Brian's team at the moment, and to clarify a few things. But overall, so what did you particularly ask for?
Are we in a position to get to the 19th of December if some of the issues I'm hearing about in the wider community do come to fruition? I'm couching my words.
Yeah, that's mostly around the valuation of the forestry, and we believe that our position is currently correct. Our team is meeting with the valuers and our forestry people here this afternoon. We should have that nailed down by the end of the day.
Was that question about the net value of them rather than, yeah. So,
All right. Great. Thank you very much. Well, there's no further questions. Thank you, Yvonne, for coming in and just giving us hope for the 19th. And thanks, Brian, for assisting as well. Thank you very much. I'll now put the motion. The motion is that the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee receives the update from Audit New Zealand. And I have a mover for that. Councillor Suncorp, seconder. Councillor Southwell. Is there any further discussion? None. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. We'll now move to item 8.7, the Internal Audit Charter. And welcome John Gamba, Manager Risk Assurance and Security, to introduce the report for us. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Chair. This is a very standard internal audit charter that we've drafted. It's based on best practice we could find out there, but mainly on recommendations by the Institute of Internal Auditors and the Chartered Accountants of Australia and New Zealand. So it just seeks to establish the purpose, responsibility, and so on of the internal audit function, and most importantly, the authority and independence. I will take the document as read. Just one correction that we'll make is on page 72, Professional Standards, the New Zealand Institute of Chartered Accountants will change that to Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand. So any questions on the document, I'm happy to try and answer.
Thanks, John. It doesn't look like there's any questions. So yeah, thanks for producing this report and the charter. It explains things and responsibilities very, very well. And the checks and balances in the process. Thank you very much. And so what I'll do is I'll put the motion, and then there'll be an opportunity for discussion. So the motion that the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee approves the Internal Audit Charter. I have a mover for that, please. Move. Councillor Southworth, seconder. Graham Naylor. Is there any further discussion? No further discussion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? No, carried. Thank you very much. Thanks, John. We'll now move to item 8.8, the Procurement Policy. And I'll invite, who's talking to this? John also. Oh, Brian, could I invite you to the table? Thank you. Thank you.
Right. This is basically just reporting back the final outcome of the policy development, which was based off the workshop we did with council just before the election. Really, it's been signed off by the CE, but I mean, open to questions about what you've read in the paper.
Through the chair. I just want to come down to 9 and 10, engagement, significance and Māori participation. So you're actually, the procurement policy includes statements that specifically identify the importance of ECan's relationship with Ngāi Tahu and Te Ao Māori in general. This opens ECan up to developing commercial partnerships with mana whenua that align with ECan's values, strategic direction, and encourage the further development of Māori business in Canterbury. Would you put a percentage on that?
That was considered, and we do know that central government attempted to do that. Yeah, that's right. But we, the tone of the council discussion was they preferred to couch it in terms of people who meet or come together with ECan's values and be on the same journey as us, whether it be environmental or in terms of culture. So there wasn't at the time much interest in putting a percentage on that. It was too restrictive.
Too restrictive.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't they have a minimum?
I think the overriding interest the council had at the time was to keep the policy as flexible as possible, and they didn't want to be prescriptive at any point in the development of it.
Yeah, with all due respect, though, it's just words. And whereas, and that's when you looked at the Crown policy, they all went there as well. But for Māori, actually, because they've heard a lot of this before, they've been to that hangi a few times. But yeah, to be quite specific in what you're talking about, because this is quite general. Yeah, all I'm saying is that interesting that you guys, who had the discussion? Sorry.
This was a briefing to the whole council at the time, just before the election. It was about September, I think.
I think that the nature of the conversation or the briefing was that on a number of issues, including the one that you raised, Councillor, was around ensuring that we had the ability to recognise the particular procurement activity that was being undertaken, because there's lots of different procurement that requires a different response. In finalising the wording of the policy, Brian worked very closely with Davo and the 2-year team to make sure that we reflected the wording. What also will be associated with the policy is a whole load of guidance and procedures, and importantly, in making sure that when we identify criteria that we'll be applying to evaluate them, that we ensure that that recognition of building that cultural capability or that alignment with values is explicit in those criteria that we will consider, just as, I'm not saying this is important, but just as their commitment to having a presence in Canterbury, or their commitment to reducing their carbon footprint, whilst so without wanting to prescribe and limit the opportunity about who can partner with us and deliver value for money, making sure that we build in that flexibility and that recognition of the importance of it in our overarching policy.
Through the chair again. Yeah, but you're specific here in commercial partnerships. I mean, what you mentioned is actually a little bit different than that. So anyway, not to labour the point, again, I come back to the reasoning why you'd want to have a cultural audit, because it would that's where it would be picked up as to the implementation, and also, you know, how many are things happening, engagement with the, and I mean, you're talking about Ngāi Tahu again, so you need to be more specific around what faces, because Ngāi Tahu, a lot of people, is the glass tower actually over there at Show Place, whereas we're talking about Papatupa-Runanga, we're talking about Rōpū Māori, Ngāi Tahu, Kātu Māmoe Waitaha, you know, that thing. Anyway, just make that point.
Just on a broader comment for the committee, the reason, as Brian has said, is that there was a lot of conversation around this policy following an internal audit last year, and that's one of the reasons we brought it back here to council, to this committee. It is actually a corporate policy signed off by the CE, as Brian has said, although obviously we want to keep it as a live and living document going forward. What we do plan to do is to provide this committee with an overview of that corporate and council policy framework that we are putting in place through the work that John and Catherine are doing, so that you have some comfort that A, we have the right policies in place and that we have rightly distinguished between those policies that we're identifying as council that require council approval and those that the chief executive can sign off as they apply to the organisation. So we will bring that back in either February or I believe March is probably where we're intending to bring that, assuming the dates of the committees are agreed next week.
Thanks, Giles. Councillor Southworth, you've got a question?
Yeah, just to clarify, can you just clarify for me that what an unsolicited proposal is? Is it when there's a slight like a tenderer can put in a variation to a bid package and they can make a variation to a part? But this sounds like something completely sort of left field coming in that's completely different. So I just was wondering, I've not heard of that before, and I just wonder if you could just clarify what that's about.
Oh, well, we do get a lot of unsolicited proposals, quite often from software companies who send you information that says, we have a solution to your problem that you didn't know you had. And sometimes they're correct. So this gives us the out to be able to say, yeah, that's a great thing. Let's try that out, basically.
Thank you. I just had a query on page 4. It really relates to the Paris Agreement, I suppose, and then the work that's being done through COP26, where there's sort of a global requirement for businesses to consider the sustainability issues right the way through their supply chain, and it's not mentioned on here. So it's like I mean, I know, given what we've heard about items 9 and 10, I'm just wondering if perhaps the procurement policy isn't complete and that we still have some guideline documents. And do you think it would be useful to consider any additional comments or any revision to this, perhaps early next year, just to consider a few more issues on this?
Well, our view tends to be that the overarching policy should be relatively simple and generic, and then we put the kind of detail you're referring to into the guidelines, and particularly in terms of that environmental and social end-to-end view, there's some very innovative work being done by Fitch credit rating company, for example, which they're actually developing an index of scores for that environmental cultural view of various organizations and companies, and so we want to pick up some of that and leverage off that in the near future. So yeah, by all means, but that will largely be in the guidelines.
Okay, thanks, Brian. I'll put the
would you rate this as a significant difference in our procurement policy to our previous procurement policy?
It's more of a bringing it into the modern world, really. There's a lot of stuff which was never even conceived of in the original policy.
So will you have the ability to measure the difference in cost between following the new procurement policy and the old-fashioned world we lived in before this policy?
That will be very challenging because obviously the purchasing patterns may not be the same, and the products we're chasing may not be the same. But certainly, one way we would attempt to do it by the level of cost reduction and discount that we're able to achieve on key contracts, etc. And there are some key ones that recur on a regular basis. So we'd be looking to see how much we can push those down in a reasonable way and improve service, etc. Yeah.
Just add to what Brian has said, I think that it also relates to the broader work that Brian and his team are doing about procure to pay, about the whole end to end and contract management. And we've talked before to this committee and to other places to the council about the need to take a more holistic, all of organisational view. One of the recommendations in the procurement audit that was reported just over 12 months ago to this committee was about category management, about recognising that multiple parts of the organisation are buying or procuring or purchasing similar goods and services. So how do we aggregate up that spend to get better value for money in the broadest sense of the word, including financial costs to the ratepayer? And as we see that contract management work and the contract register work improve and improve the ability and visibility of those processes to our procurement team, we will see an increase in information that we'll be able to provide about the performance of the procurement team and therefore the value that they are adding.
Thanks, Brian. I think that's the end of questions. So thank you very much. You can leave the table. Thank you. I'll put the motion that the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee, 1, notes the final version of the procurement policy, and 2, notes the final procurement policy was developed in collaboration with staff, executive leadership team, and following a workshop with council in September 2022. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor Southworth. Second, Councillor Southworth. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. I would like to note in the minutes that further development or consideration of the content for guidelines is discussed with staff, operational staff. The second point is that we just consider the wording related to engagement, significance, and Maori participation. I'm not discussing. I'm just saying I'll put that in the minutes. We've finished the discussion. Thank you. Oh, sorry. We'll just move on to item 8.9, forward work plan 2022-23, and invite John Gamba. Oh, Giles, you're going to John. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the forward working plan for the Audit, Finance, Risk Committee. The one that we've included there was agreed at the previous Audit, Finance, Risk Committee, one of the previous ones in June 2022. Just gives you an idea of how it's set up. It's as it is at the moment. We'll be working over the next month or so, 2 months, just to once we get the new schedule confirmed and everything done, we'll work it out and we'll present it at the February Audit, Finance and Risk Committee for approval and input.
Thanks, John. Are there any questions of clarification on the report? No questions. It's fairly clear, John. This is an indicative stage we're at now, and once the program comes out, we'll further develop that. So thank you very much. I'll put the motion that the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee notes the agreed forward work plan for the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee. Do I have a mover? John, seconder. Look, thank you very much. Any discussion? No discussion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're now going to ask for a recommendation to go into Public Excluded, which is on page 88. Yep. Okay, putting the motion that I move that the public be excluded from the following parts of the proceedings of this meeting, namely items listed on page 88 of the agenda. I'm just going to name the people who are able to attend this part of the meeting. We need to scroll down a little. No, just these ones. Lucy De La Tour from Wynne Williams, John Gamba, Yvonne Young, and Debbie Bradfield, sorry. For all reports for items 9.1 to 9.3, Brian Elliott, 9.2 to 9.24, Lisa van der Play. And could I have a mover for that, please? John Sunkel, second. Second. Vicky Southworth, second.
Directors and stuff.
And directors automatically staying, so you're
Directors are automatically
privileged.
apart from Ted.
Sorry. So. Okay, all those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried, thank you. We're just going to take a 10-minute break, and which we're required to do, and then we'll come back. Thank you. We started again, so we're now back in the public meeting, and just item 10 there, the next meeting. The next meeting date has not been advised yet, and the council's meeting on the 14th of December will confirm the new date. So we just have to wait till then. I'd like to the closing Karakia. Would you basically declare the meeting closed at the time and invite Councillor Karakia to close with a Karakia. Thank you very much. Merry Christmas.